More for you now. We're going to start the session now with Col Sy, so you've heard mentioned a few times this morning. So will you please give Col a warm welcome to stage. He's going to talk about, he's a mixed farmer on a property called Winoa via Gulgong, and his question centrally is why change? Please, a warm round of applause for Col.
Turned on. Don't give me technology. It flew up before we started. I've been told my main job here is to make sure I keep you awake after lunch, and I'll try to do that. But I'm going to talk, mate, about why change. I mean, really, why change? If everything's okay, why the hell do we have to change? But I'd suggest that certainly everything isn't right, and there's some major problems happening all over the world. Financial problems, farmers going broke, and directly related to multinational companies ripping us farmers off. Most of the time we just simply get the wrong end of the pineapple, and the multinational companies get the money. So for over 60 or maybe even 70 years, we've had a lot amount of money spent on pesticides, fertilisers, crops, all that stuff, which has been really an ecological and financial disaster all over the world, not just here in Australia. All this stuff is crashing all over the world. And we keep on being told, with people that have vested interest in making money off us, that everything is fine. Well, it's not bloody fine. The whole thing's crashing, and we really do need to change. So why do I farm differently? Been suggested that I farm differently because I'm a bloody lunatic, and it's probably true. So, but I farm differently partly because related to the high costs of what I was doing, but we'll get to the main reason I've changed shortly. Just not going to go into this, I haven't got much time, but quite a lot of different enterprises been based on sheep and wool growing now for 130 years. Not me personally, but the family has been. So my great-grandparents settled in the area in the 1860s and always grew merino sheep, which is generally a bit of an indication that the family's not overly intelligent. But but also my great-grandfather started growing wheat in the 1860s. Now, the observant amongst you may notice that photo that my great-grandfather's only got one leg, and I just want to assure everyone here that it's not a genetic defect. But the main reason I want to talk about them was not my great-grandfather, but my great-grandmother. You could imagine, I better not tell too many stories here, I've only got 20 minutes. You could imagine how difficult it would be ploughing and paddock hopping behind a horse team. So great-grandfather went into the house and reared 9 kids, and Granny went out and did all the farm work. And she changed the way the whole family farmed since that point. Changed our thinking, and especially my father's thinking, her grandson. So where I'm getting at is we need more women in agriculture. Normally when I say that, people chuck rocks at me, but thank you. And we need more women in agriculture because we need nurturers. Agriculture is supposed to be about nurturing the land, nurturing animals. Us blokes want to kill things. And we kill them with bulldozers and ploughs and pesticides. We need more women, we need more nurturers. So, the place at home, where was I up to? Place at home, I'll skip about 3 generations now, from the 1940s to the 1970s, was an industrial farm. My father got into the Green Revolution, fertiliser, pesticides. That form of agriculture was costing us, well, my father, about $80,000 annually, just for those inputs. And that form of agriculture was actually sending us broke, or sending my father broke, although he was extremely good at what he did. But the reason it was crashing was that the farm was no longer functioning as an ecosystem. And you're going to hear me mention ecosystem and ecology a fair bit in this little talk, because no one puts ecology and agriculture together in the same sentence. In that era, we were growing things that wanted to die and killing things that wanted to live. And nothing's bloody changed. We're still doing the same thing. Not at home, but I mean agriculture generally. So how and why did I change? 1979, we had a major bushfire, which burnt everything. House sheds, 3,000 sheep, the whole lot. And we were broke from that fire, going okay one day and broke the next. So how did I survive? Well, there was about 800 ewes survived it, which we used to rebuild our numbers. I started growing wheat because we didn't have enough sheep. But the most important thing that came out of that is that I learnt to have a sense of humour. It's about the only way we can survive some of these hard times. So what I was doing in that form of agriculture was, well, I adopted farming like my father had, which was typical ploughing country and sowing crops. That failed. We got crop diseases, all sorts of problems. When that failed, I adopted no-till or zero-till cropping, and same thing. It failed also. Crop disease, more and more fertiliser. So what did I do then? I went and got some agronomic advice, and basically it was about putting more fertiliser on. Yeah, and that's normally how we fix things now. More fertiliser, more pesticides, which I love to call more on agriculture. So, but that was the advice, and that was in 1990, not yesterday. So, double fertiliser, all that stuff, more weed control. I didn't accept that advice because the fertiliser we're putting on was actually going to kill the wheat plants. And I had to change the way I was doing things to make that happen. So every step I took, I ran into problems. So how do you fix all that? Well, being Australian, it's fairly easy. You just go and have a beer and think about it. So that bottle of beer will come up again in a minute. What I actually did was, because we had no money, I restored the property to a grassland. I focused on restoring it to a native grassland. And I did that through a combination of changes to grazing management, to holistic management, and pasture cropping. Now, I'm not going to talk very much at all about grazing management today, not because it's not important, it's absolutely vital, and it's vital in my story as well. But other people have covered that. Don't think that it's not important. The grazing management is vitally important, as things like, well, many of these types of regenerative forms of agriculture should be put together. They shouldn't be separated. We should be combining many of them. And Peter's work, permaculture type work, organics, if we start putting them all together, then we'll start to get great gains. So what we're doing at home, just really quite quickly, 2 main mobs, 3-4 months recovery, and I also use the sheep to prepare paddocks to sow crops. Now, I just spoke about holistic management in about 10 seconds. Obviously, it's a bit more complicated than that, so it'd be a good idea to go to a course and learn how to do it properly. So, one of the problems, I'll just get onto how I've growing crops. So, the way crops are growing, we're using ploughs and pesticides, really kills grasslands, kills the soil ecosystem, and destroys the farm ecosystem. it's a bloody disaster, either on ploughing and excessive herbicides is a disaster. We need to find another way of doing that. So I'll just talk a little bit about what I'm going to mention now, talk about is what I do on my own farm. It's not the answer, it's just what I've done. This is my bottle of beer again. Pasture cropping was developed, no great philosophical idea. It was just a mate of mine, Darryl Clough, and I got in the grog one night, and it seemed like a good idea. So, and that's really, actually, it is where it came from. Now, but it is about sowing crops into grasslands when they're in their dormant stage with zero tilling or no-till techniques. It's happening more than just around the Central West. There's 3 million acres worldwide now being pasture cropped, and a lot of adoption in the US now. So what we're doing is combining grazing and cropping, where each one benefits the other ecologically and financially. So they can be beneficial if we get these two things functioning together. Just a quick little overview of sowing. We mulch that grassland with a very large mob of sheep, high densities, sow the crop into it, and yes, it does look like a vegetable garden. And we'll get on to a vegetable garden. In fact, while I'm on that, we should farm more like how we garden. We know how to garden, been doing it for thousands of years. And Bronwyn that spoke earlier, was Bronwyn, yep, actually had a lot of that nailed very well. So then we can harvest the crop later in the year. I took a few slides out of that for time. So, but also in this process, one of the best things it does is restore grasslands. With a combination of the right sort of grazing, this can restore grasslands in species diversity, and we harvest native grass seed off these grasslands now. And after the crop is harvested also, we have good grazing on these paddocks. Pasture cropping itself, or how we manage it, what we actually do, all we're really doing is restoring the grassland, really, and putting a crop in it. So, but it will restore grasslands, it will restore the soil ecosystem and the farm ecosystem, and it is certainly more profitable because there's very little risk in it. So, I can't help myself. Who's the timekeeper? How much time we got? 10 minutes. Oh, geez, I can slow down. Right. Now, I was always thinking about this. Even though I had great diversity in the grassland, well, now we have. Remember, I started with a paddock full of weeds 30 years ago with this, and there wasn't a grassland then. Now there's about 60 species in there, but I was still growing a single species crop into this grassland. And I just wanted to I wanted to drive it further and faster. I wanted to improve the soil more. So I started planting multi-species crops or mixes of species. I did say that I was a lunatic earlier on. But remember what Bronwyn had in her talk, I think her name was Bronwyn, about mixing species together in her garden. Well, this is what we're doing here, but in a grassland. And those species can be as diverse as your imagination lets you to grow. So here we've got, what's there? Oats, brassica, pea, vetch, many different things growing in a grassland. Now, the advantages of that, from an agricultural point of view, very, very good quality grazing, far better than oats on its own. But you get great soil health benefits from that that mixes of crops and different plant root systems. You can put flowering plants in there to attract beneficial insects. So you can drive the whole farm ecosystem with these mixes of plants. Now, that's just an example of one of the crops that we had, a multi-species crop. I get a neighbour down the road that does my contract harvesting, and he does know I'm a lunatic. So that's what it looks like. Very messy crop. But we harvested that. I wanted to find out whether I could harvest grain from a multi-species crop. And we did. And we got a multi-species grain mix. Now, there mightn't be a lot of use for that, but I re-sowed that. Some people have suggested it'd be wonderful pig feed and wonderful chook food. But we don't necessarily need a single species in our crop, either grain or grazing. Certainly not from a grazing point of view. And that is that grassland 6-7 months later, in next winter. So if we look at that paddock, that grass, these areas, we've got grazing of the grassland or the pastures before the crop is sown. Crop is sown, we almost always graze those crops as well. The crop is harvested. Then and remember, with that multi-species crop, many of those species are actually vegetables, like peas and turnip and radish, daikon radish, and many others, but in that mix are all vegetables. So it's possible to grow vegetables on a very large scale in a grassland. I haven't worked out how to harvest them yet. Now that can be done with very low inputs, certainly no ploughing, no pesticides, or certainly very greatly reduced pesticides, and it can be done organically. And while that's happening, we can restore the grassland and the soil ecosystem and the farm ecosystem. But always remember, it's overlaid with good grazing management. So, this is just this year. I thought I'd better put some slides up about what it was like in a dry season, and that's fine. The crops are that cheap to sow, and the pastures or the grassland's always better after. It's almost impossible to lose money on it. You'd have to try really hard to lose money. So, agriculture and sound ecological practices should function together, and we never do that. They should function together. Just what's happened at home. Now we have, as I mentioned before, about 50 or 60 grassland species. It is restored grassland. Weeds have declined from 60% to about 5%. When we change this, we can. Charlie mentioned that. Once we change, I think it was Charlie. Someone mentioned that today. We can change. If we change one thing, we can change the lot all at one go. It's not that difficult. This stuff is really quite easy. There's nothing complicated about it. If two blokes on the grog can think of this, it's not really difficult. So now, we haven't used insecticide at home for over 20 years. Don't get insect attack in crops. How? Well, you'll have to ask me later because I haven't got enough time. And also, haven't used fungicide for over 20 years. We don't have crop diseases. How? Same story, but it's about soil ecosystem functioning well. We haven't used fertiliser on pastures. Haven't used superphosphate or any pasture fertiliser for over 30 years. Well, it was more than that. It's nearly 40 years since the fire in 1979. And we've reduced the crop fertiliser by 70% and use biological type inputs now. Now, how is that happening? I've just got a little bit here. The farm has been documented probably more than any other farm in Australia because no bastard believed this was happening. So I invited them to come and have a look. So the soil nutrients have all increased by 162%. That's all of them, trace elements and everything. And carbon levels have increased by over 200%. So is it profitable? It's a fairly obvious question. Yeah, it certainly is. That $80,000 that I mentioned earlier that we were spending in that high input industrialised agriculture, we now no longer spend. So we're $80,000 ahead before we start. So, and we're growing far more wool, meat, and many other things, and also native grass sales are an important part of our income. So, I can slow down now because I'm nearly finished. Oh, gee, I can really slow down. Okay, our farms should function as ecosystems. And that message is so important. The way agriculture has been practiced for the last, well, especially the last 60 or 70 years, the ecosystem and ecology has never been mentioned. But most of the problems in agriculture are related to they're ecological problems. They're not agricultural problems really at all. So, agriculture doesn't have to destroy our farms or the planet. We can produce vast amounts of food. I mean, we've been told a hell heap of bullshit for a long time. We really have. I mean, and now the big one is, oh, we've got to use industrial agriculture because we've got to feed all these people. We waste more food than we use on this planet. We don't need industrial agriculture. We don't need the form it's in now anyway. So we don't have to destroy our farms. We can regenerate our grassland, regenerate our soils and our farm ecosystems. But we certainly can't do it with the model we've got. The only way we can really do it is that our agricultural practices need to function closer to how old Mother Nature had it in the first place. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I thought Colin was going to tell us what he really thought, but no, it is great. And I'll tell you what: if you're the lunatic, then maybe it's time we put lunatics in charge of the asylum. I reckon. That's good. Okay, let's get down to some questions. What native grass species do you harvest?
Mostly, there's four main ones that we harvest. Red grass, which is a very common one, Warrego summergrass, which is a Paspaldium, cotton panic, which is Digitaria, what else? Armgrass millet, some kangaroo grass. Yeah, so, yeah.
Okay. Another question here, do you use permanent fencing or temporary fencing? And what's the cost difference?
Don't know. Don't know the cost difference. No, I use permanent fencing, and I just did that over a period of years. Started fencing it and just kept on subdividing paddocks. Now there's about 70 paddocks at home, which is used in the grazing management.
Yeah, rightio. And questions have just danced around there. We hear cover cropping and pasture cropping. What is the difference?
Yep. Pasture cropping is actually perennial cover cropping. And the cover cropping, so that many of you have heard of Gabe Brown. Now, Gabe uses a method called annual cover cropping, where they're sowing a multi-species mix like I had there as their cover and then sowing a cash crop into it. The grass is my cover and the multi-species crop is my crop, so it's reversed around.
Okay. How long did it take to see an improvement in the pasture and soil?
Really interesting. Sometimes, now, don't get me wrong, we can do this, we can get these improvements with good grazing management as well. There's not a problem with that. This process speeds that up. That's really what it does. So anyway, almost always we will get an improvement in an increase in perennial grass species within that first 12 months. But within 5 years, we see a big improvement in perennial grass seed. Now, grasses. Remember, that has to come from seed that's in the soil. We haven't sown any of these grasses. Seed that's in the soil has been there for probably 100 years or more. We're stimulating the germination of those seeds that are in the soil.
Yeah, right, okay. And you've measured this, I heard you say before. You're not just making this up. after a couple of beers, I do have to ask. This fella could tell us anything.
some of the work that Peter... Is Peter Ampt still here? I think he said he had to go. Peter Ampt. Well, I know you're here, Peter.
No, Peter Ampt, I think, did
Peter
have to go.
Some of the work that Peter Ampt spoke about, some of that work was done at home, but CSIRO have done work at home. Canberra Uni, Melbourne Uni, and obviously Sydney Uni as well. There's a lot of data being collected at home.
And back to what we saw earlier in terms of, was that data important to you, or was it just the self-evident change that you worked from?
I could see that it was working. I didn't really need that data, but if I was going to stand up here and tell bullshit and lies, I wanted it backed up. So, and because no one was going to believe this, because we were getting changes happen that should never have happened, not in an industrial mindset.
And on that change point, there's a question here that says, do you think change requires a crisis?
Hopefully it doesn't, but that's when it often happens. People that want, don't wait for a crisis. Yeah. Change, but change gradually. Make sure you transition into change. Don't go broke while you're changing.
Yeah, well, and that ties into our next question, which is what advice you would give the next generation of farmers.
Have a more open mind than we've had in the past. Look at things a lot more broadly. We've been, and be aware that people are trying to flog our stuff, sell our stuff. So be well aware that most people that are trying to sell you stuff are doing it for not your benefit, but for their own, a multinational company.
Okay.
You don't work for an agronomy company, do you?
No, I don't. You're right. I don't work for anyone now. Would you consider restoring your farm to a forest system to further diversify? I can put you in touch with my dad if you're interested in that.
No, I wouldn't. I've planted, there's 20,000 trees been planted there, all native. I better not go down this track, but our grasslands had scattered trees through them. They weren't scrub. So we don't need necessarily to go back to forests to get diversity. There's nothing wrong with that type of farming, like with trees and grasslands and everything mixed as well. But
okay. Yeah. All right, and I'm gonna monopolise the last question here because I can. Do you think things would have been different if you were drinking Tooheys Old instead of Tooheys New? I've got.
Probably a lot better because Tooheys Old's got a bit more alcohol in it. I'm amazed that we even remembered it next morning. And that's another thing. Cluffy and I used to always often talk, and I guess we used to do this a bit, and discuss problems of the world. And we were really concerned that we probably thought of something even a lot better, but we couldn't ever remember it again.
Well, Cole, thanks for bringing what you did remember to us today. That's great.